I didn't realize something was wrong with Emily until the silence started to feel deliberate. Not the comfortable kind we'd grown used to over the years, but the kind that hangs in the air like a question no one wants to answer. We'd been married for 11 years, long enough that routines replaced surprises and habits stood in for romance. David and Emily, that's how people said our names together, like a single unit. I believed in that unity more than I believed in anything else at the time. We met in our mid-20s, both tired of short relationships and half-truths. Emily was calm where I was impulsive, thoughtful where I was blunt. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, small details about people's lives. I remembered how to make her laugh when she was overwhelmed, and how she liked her coffee when mornings were rough. We weren't perfect, but we were steady. Or at least, that's the story I told myself. Our house reflected that steadiness. 2 floors, beige walls we never bothered to repaint, furniture chosen for comfort rather than style. Every room held evidence of a shared life. Photos from road trips, a chipped mug Emily refused to throw away, a bookshelf filled with novels we promised to read together someday. Nothing about our life screamed disaster. That's what made the change so hard to notice at first. Emily started coming home later than usual. Not dramatically late, just late enough to disrupt dinner plans. She'd apologize, say work ran long, drop her bag by the door, and head straight for the shower. I didn't question it. Her job had always been demanding, and I was proud of how seriously she took it. Still, something in her eyes had shifted. She looked tired in a way sleep didn't fix. We talked less. Conversations that once wandered now ended quickly, as if we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing. When I asked how her day was, she'd say, "Fine," and change the subject. When she asked about mine, I'd give a short answer and wait for her to open up. Neither of us did. We moved around each other like strangers learning new rules. One evening I noticed she'd turned her phone face down on the table. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but it stuck with me. Emily had never cared about things like that. Her phone used to buzz freely, messages popping up without concern. That night, every vibration made her tense. She'd glance at the screen, then at me, then excuse herself to the kitchen. I told myself I was overthinking. 11 years together earns a certain level of trust, or at least it should. The first argument came out of nowhere. We were talking about something insignificant, whether to visit her parents that weekend, when she snapped. Not loudly, but sharply, like she'd been holding it in for weeks. She accused me of not listening, of being emotionally distant, of taking her for granted. I stood there stunned, trying to catch up to a conversation she'd apparently been having in her head without me. I apologized. I always did. I told her I'd try harder, asked her to tell me what she needed. She softened, just a little, but the distance didn't disappear. That night she slept facing the wall. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past year, wondering when I'd miss the turn. Over the next few weeks, patterns emerged. She avoided eye contact during difficult conversations. She flinched when I reached for her hand. When I suggested counseling, she said we didn't need outside opinions. That phrase stuck with me. It sounded rehearsed, defensive, as if she'd already discussed it with someone else. The worst part wasn't the arguments or the late nights. It was the feeling that I was slowly being edited out of her life. Decisions made without me, plans I wasn't included in. A growing sense that I was living beside Emily, not with her. Friends noticed it before I admitted it to myself. They asked if everything was okay. I said yes. I believed it had to be. One night, while taking out the trash, I noticed her car wasn't in the driveway, even though she'd said she was home for the evening. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the hum of the streetlights, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. For the first time, a thought crossed my mind that I wasn't ready to face. What if the silence wasn't accidental? When Emily finally came home, she looked startled to see me awake. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She asked if everything was okay. I said yes. The lie tasted bitter, but I swallowed it anyway. Because part of me already knew the truth was going to change everything. And once you start sensing that, once the doubt takes root, it doesn't stop growing. It waits, quietly, patiently, until it finds the right moment to break everything open. The morning after I noticed Emily's car missing from the driveway, I woke up with the strange certainty that something irreversible had already happened. Nothing concrete, no proof, no confession, just a quiet shift inside me, like a door closing somewhere deep in the house of my thoughts. Emily was already awake, dressed for work, standing in front of the mirror. She looked composed, almost peaceful, which only made the unease worse. She kissed my cheek before leaving. It was quick, practiced, and empty. When the door closed behind her, I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the echo fade. That was the moment I realized how much I had started measuring my life by her absence rather than her presence. At work, I couldn't focus. Emails blurred together, meetings passed without me hearing a word. I kept replaying small details in my head. The face-down phone, the late nights, the way she'd begun guarding her words. None of it was enough to accuse her of anything, but together it felt like a puzzle with too many pieces missing on purpose. That evening I decided to do something I'd never done before. I checked our shared calendar. We used it for everything: appointments, birthdays, reminders to pay bills. Emily had always insisted on keeping it updated, but the last few weeks were strangely empty. No late meetings, no extra shifts, nothing that explained her absences, just blank space. When she came home, I asked her about it, casually, carefully. I didn't want to sound suspicious. She hesitated for half a second before answering, and that half second told me more than her words ever could. "I must have forgotten to update it," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. "It's been hectic." I nodded. Again, always nodding, always accepting explanations that didn't quite fit. But that night, when she fell asleep beside me, her back turned, I stayed awake and stared at the faint crack in the ceiling above our bed. I'd seen that crack 1,000 times before, but suddenly it felt symbolic. Something small that had been ignored for too long, slowly spreading. Over the next few days, I started noticing how carefully Emily managed information. She'd mention coworkers I'd never heard of before, then act surprised when I asked questions. She began taking phone calls outside, even when it was cold. Once I walked into the room just as she ended a call. She jumped, then laughed it off, saying I scared her, but her hands were shaking. I thought about confronting her directly, about demanding honesty, but fear held me back. Not fear of the truth itself, but fear of what it would force me to do next. It's easier to live with doubt than with certainty, at least for a while. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Emily said she was meeting a friend for dinner and would be home late. I told her to have fun. I meant it. Or maybe I just wanted to believe I did. Around 10, I decided to go for a drive. No destination, just movement. I needed air. That's when I saw her car. It was parked outside a small restaurant across town, not one we'd ever been to together. The lights inside were dim, warm. I told myself to keep driving, to respect her privacy, to trust the woman I'd built my life with. But my hands turned the wheel without asking permission. I parked across the street and waited. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe nothing. Maybe confirmation that I was paranoid. Instead, I saw Emily through the window, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. They were leaning toward each other, talking closely. At one point, she laughed. A genuine laugh, the kind I hadn't heard at home in months. I didn't go inside. I didn't confront them. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching a version of my wife I felt increasingly excluded from. When she reached across the table and touched his hand, something inside me finally snapped into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This wasn't distance that time would fix. When I drove home later that night, the house felt different, smaller, colder, like it already knew what I hadn't said out loud yet. Emily came home hours later, quiet, careful, slipping into bed beside me as if nothing had happened. I lay awake, staring at the darkness, realizing that the story of our marriage was no longer something we were writing together. And whatever came next, it wasn't going to be gentle. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I drifted in and out of shallow half-dreams where Emily's laughter echoed in places it didn't belong. By morning, my head hurt, my chest felt tight, and my thoughts were sharper than they'd ever been. When the alarm went off, Emily stirred beside me, groggy and quiet. She didn't mention coming home late. She didn't ask why I looked exhausted. We moved through the morning like actors reading lines we'd memorized years ago. I watched her carefully, the way she poured coffee, the way she avoided looking directly at me, the way she checked her phone, then slipped it into her bag as if it might betray her if left unattended. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask her who he was and how long this had been going on. But instead, I did nothing. I told myself I needed clarity before confrontation, proof before accusation. That lie gave me something to hold on to. At work, I made a decision that felt both wrong and inevitable. I left early, told my manager I wasn't feeling well, which in a way was true. My body felt heavy, like it was carrying a truth my mind hadn't fully accepted yet. I drove home slowly, hoping the familiar streets would calm me. They didn't. The house was empty when I arrived, quiet in that unsettling way that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. I walked through each room, noticing things I'd ignored for years. The framed wedding photo in the hallway, Emily's shoes by the door, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the bedroom. It all felt fragile now, like a set built to look real until you get close enough to see the seams. I told myself not to do what I was about to do. I said it out loud, standing in the kitchen like someone might hear me, but my feet carried me upstairs anyway. Emily's laptop sat on the desk, closed but not locked away. She rarely used it at home anymore, said she preferred her phone. That thought alone made my stomach turn. I opened it. There was no password. That hurt more than I expected. It meant she didn't think she had anything to hide. Or worse, that she thought I'd never look. I stared at the screen for a long moment before moving the mouse, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might drown out my thoughts. Her email was still open. I didn't read everything. I didn't need to. One thread near the top was enough. A name I didn't recognize. Casual subject lines. Familiar tone. The kind of warmth that doesn't exist between coworkers who just talk. My hands shook as I scrolled. Messages about meetings that ran long, about how nice it felt to be understood, about how complicated things were at home. One message stood out, simple, direct. I wish things were different. I hate sneaking around like this. Sneaking around. I closed the laptop, slowly, carefully, as if sudden movement might break something already cracked beyond repair. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, feeling numb. Not angry yet, just hollow, like the part of me that trusted without question had finally given up. When Emily came home that evening, I was waiting. Not dramatically, not pacing, just sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, pretending to read something on my phone. She froze when she saw me. Just for a second, but I saw it. That moment where she assessed the situation before choosing a response. "Hey," she said cautiously, "you're home early." "So are you," I replied. My voice sounded calm, which surprised me. She set her bag down slowly. "Yeah, I canceled my plans." I looked up at her then, really looked. Her eyes searched my face for clues, for signs of what I knew. I gave her none. Not yet. "We need to talk," I said. The words hung between us, heavy and unavoidable. Emily swallowed hard and nodded. She sat across from me, folding her hands the way she did when she was nervous. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, counting something down. I wanted to ask her everything. I wanted to say his name, even though I didn't know it yet. I wanted to tell her I'd seen her through that restaurant window, laughing like she used to laugh with me. But instead, I asked one simple question. "Are you happy?" I said. Her eyes filled with tears immediately. And in that moment, before she even answered, I knew the truth was already out. I just didn't yet understand how much it was going to cost both of us.
Emily didn't answer my question right away. She looked down at her hands, rubbing her thumb over her wedding ring as if she were trying to decide whether it still belonged there. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I noticed how loud the clock sounded again, each tick landing like a small accusation. Finally, she took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I don't think I've known for a while." That was worse than a yes, worse than a no. It told me she'd been living with this uncertainty long enough for it to feel normal. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral, even as something inside me twisted. I wanted to shout that happiness wasn't something you casually misplaced, that it was built, protected, fought for. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. "How long?" I asked. She hesitated again, this time longer. Her eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me, as if she were calculating how much truth I could handle. That hesitation answered the question before she spoke. "A few months," she said. "It didn't start the way you think." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. They never start the way you think. They start as conversations, complaints, shared understanding. I'd read the stories, heard the warnings. I just never believed I'd be inside one. "Is there someone else?" I asked, even though I already knew. Emily closed her eyes, just for a second, but that second was enough. "Yes," she whispered. The word landed softly, but its impact was brutal. I felt it spread through me, cold and heavy, settling into places I didn't know could hurt. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware of how tired I was. Not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying the weight of a marriage that had been quietly unraveling without my consent. "Do you love him?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "It's not like that. I didn't plan for this to happen. He just listened. He saw me." I looked at her then with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I've been here," I said. "I've always been here." "I know," she replied, tears finally spilling over. "That's what makes this so hard." Hard. Another small word doing a lot of damage. She reached for my hand, and instinctively I pulled away. The movement surprised both of us. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I hated that reaction, but I couldn't take it back. The idea of her touching me felt wrong now, like something sacred had been contaminated. "I saw you," I said suddenly. Her breath caught. "What?" "At the restaurant, with him," I continued. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking beneath the table. "I saw you laugh. I saw you touch his hand." Emily's face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. Then she exhaled slowly and nodded. "I didn't think you'd," she started, then stopped. "I didn't mean to hurt you." That sentence finally cracked something open in me. The anger rushed in, sharp and overwhelming. "But you did," I said. "You hurt me every time you lied. Every time you came home late. Every time you made me feel like I was imagining things." She cried openly then, shoulders shaking, apologizing over and over. I sat there, watching her fall apart, and felt strangely detached. Like I was observing someone else's life, someone else's marriage. "What do you want?" I asked after a while. She wiped her face with her sleeve, eyes red and swollen. "I don't know," she admitted. "I feel torn. I don't want to lose you, but I can't keep pretending nothing's wrong." That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't just about another man. It was about a choice she'd already made, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. She'd chosen uncertainty over us, secrecy over honesty, and now she wanted me to wait while she figured herself out. "I can't do this," I said quietly. "I can't sit here while you decide whether I'm enough." She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time all over again. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying something has to change," I replied, "because whatever we're doing right now is destroying both of us." That night, we didn't sleep in the same bed. Emily took the guest room, closing the door softly behind her. I lay awake in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar quiet, knowing that no matter what happened next, our marriage would never go back to what it was. And deep down, I suspected the worst was still ahead of us. The days after that conversation blurred together in a way that felt unreal. Emily and I existed in the same house, but we lived separate lives. We passed each other in hallways with careful politeness, like coworkers avoiding a difficult topic. She slept in the guest room. I stayed in our bed, staring at the ceiling crack that now seemed to grow wider every night, even though I knew it wasn't actually changing. We tried to talk, or at least we pretended to. Conversations were short, controlled, stripped of emotion. She said she needed time to think. I said I needed honesty. Neither of us got what we wanted. I watched her pack small overnight bags to stay with a friend, and every time the door closed behind her, the house felt a little less like a home and more like a waiting room. I started noticing how much of my identity had been wrapped up in being her husband. Simple things felt unfamiliar now. Cooking dinner for one, choosing what to watch without asking, falling asleep without another body beside me. At night, my thoughts ran wild. I replayed our entire relationship, searching for the moment where things went wrong. The truth was uncomfortable. There wasn't a single moment, just a slow erosion. One evening, Emily came home earlier than expected. She looked exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally drained in a way that made her seem smaller. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had begun to unravel. "I think we should separate," she said quietly. I'd imagined hearing those words, but nothing prepared me for how calm she sounded. No drama, no tears, just a statement, as if she were discussing logistics, not dismantling a life we'd built together. "For how long?" I asked. "I don't know," she replied. "I need space, to figure out who I am without all of this." "All of this," I repeated. "You mean us?" She didn't argue. That night, we talked about practical things. Who would stay in the house, how we'd handle bills, what we'd tell friends and family. It was surreal how quickly love turned into administration. At one point, she apologized again, saying she never meant for it to end like this. I didn't respond. Apologies felt useless now, like bandages on something already bleeding out. A week later, she moved out. Watching her load her car was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Not because I wanted to stop her, but because part of me knew this wasn't temporary. She hugged me before leaving, a long, lingering embrace that felt like closure disguised as comfort. When she drove away, I stood in the driveway until her car disappeared, wondering how something so significant could end so quietly. The house was unbearably silent after that. I started avoiding certain rooms because they still felt like her. The guest room, the bathroom shelf where her things used to be. I boxed up her remaining belongings and stacked them neatly in the garage, unable to decide whether that was an act of kindness or self-preservation. Friends reached out. Some offered support. Others offered opinions I didn't ask for. I nodded, thanked them, told them I was okay. I wasn't. I was functioning, which isn't the same thing. Nights were the worst. That's when the questions came. Who was he, really? Was he still in her life? Had I ever truly known my wife? Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. "David, this is Mark. I think you deserve to know the truth." My heart dropped. I stared at the screen, rereading the message until the words lost meaning. Mark. The name didn't ring a bell, but I knew immediately who he was. The man from the restaurant. The one who listened. the one who saw her. I didn't reply right away. I set the phone down and walked around the house, my pulse pounding, my thoughts racing. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect what little peace I had left. Another part needed answers, no matter how painful they might be. Finally, I picked up the phone and typed a single word. What truth? The typing bubble appeared almost instantly, and as I waited for his response, I had the unsettling feeling that whatever he was about to say wouldn't just explain the end of my marriage, it would change the way I saw the entire past. The reply came faster than I expected. I never meant for things to go this far, Mark wrote. But Emily didn't tell you everything, and I think you should hear it from someone who isn't trying to protect themselves. I stared at the message for a long time before answering. My hands felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me. Part of me wanted to block the number and pretend I'd never seen it, but curiosity and something darker, something closer to dread, kept me frozen in place. Call me, I finally typed. He did, immediately. I didn't say hello, I just listened. David, he began, his voice calm but strained. I'm not calling to justify anything. What I did was wrong. What she did was wrong. But there's something you don't know, and it explains why she's been pulling away for so long. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the same counter where Emily and I used to drink coffee in the mornings, where we planned trips, where we talked about a future that now felt fictional. Just say it, I said. There was a pause. Then he exhaled. She didn't just start confiding in me last year, he said. She's been preparing to leave you for a long time, longer than you think. The words landed softly, but the impact was brutal. She told me you were safe, he continued, reliable, predictable, but that she felt invisible, that she'd already mourned the marriage while still living in it. I laughed under my breath, a short, hollow sound. So I was the backup plan, I said, the stable option. No, he replied quickly. You were the life she built because it made sense, but not the one she wanted anymore. I closed my eyes. I thought back to all the times she'd seemed distant, distracted, tired for no clear reason. All the moments I'd blamed on stress or work or time. I hadn't been blindsided. I'd been slowly erased. There's more, Mark said. Of course there was. She signed a lease 2 months ago, he added, before you separated. She asked me to help her look. I thought she'd already told you. I felt my stomach twist. She told me she needed space to think. Mark didn't respond. He didn't need to. So this was planned, I said quietly. Every argument, every I don't know. She already had one foot out the door. Yes. I thanked him. I don't know why. Maybe because the truth, even when it hurts, feels cleaner than confusion. We hung up without any kind of closure, just two men standing on opposite sides of the same wreckage. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I went through old photos. Not to torture myself, at least not intentionally, but to understand. I studied Emily's face in each picture, searching for signs I'd missed. And that's when I noticed something strange. In the months before she left, she stopped appearing in photos with me. Group photos, sure. Selfies occasionally, but not us, not together. It was subtle, almost invisible. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. She had been slowly removing me from the record of her life. The next morning, I decided to confront her. Not to fight, not to beg, just to hear it from her own mouth. She agreed to meet at a small cafe near the river, neutral ground. When she walked in, she looked composed, almost relieved, like someone who'd been waiting for this conversation. I know about the apartment, I said after we sat down. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she nodded. I was going to tell you. When? I asked. She didn't answer. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. You didn't just leave me, Emily. You replaced me before I even knew I was gone. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel satisfaction, just confirmation. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said softly. "I just didn't know how to stay." I looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "That's the most honest thing you've said." We talked for another hour, not about fixing anything, but about ending it properly. When we stood to leave, she reached out, then stopped herself. I appreciated that. As I walked away, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter, not healed, not happy, but clear. Later that evening, I returned home and opened the garage. The boxes of her things were still there, untouched. I carried them one by one to my car. Not to bring them back to her, but to donate, recycle, let go. The last box was small. Inside it, I found something I didn't expect. A folded letter, yellowed with time. My handwriting. It was a note I'd written to Emily years ago, before we were married. A promise, about choosing each other, about honesty, about never leaving without speaking the truth. I stood there for a long time, holding that letter, realizing something painful and freeing at the same time. She didn't just break our marriage, she broke a promise she had already left behind. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I understood this wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I finally stopped living in someone else.